So welcome to all of you here this afternoon in the public library and those joining us via live stream to the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council's program featuring Dr. Jeffrey Ding, speaking on the topic of technology and the rise of great powers, okay? I am Dimi Doreska. I am a clinical associate professor teaching entrepreneurship and international business at the University of Iowa. And I'm also an ICFRC board member and your host for today's program. As a reminder, we plan for this program to go until 1 p.m., so you can go back to your desk and continue working. Today is our first program in our spring 2025 lineup, okay? And we are deeply grateful for the long-standing support from our community. Your help has allowed our organization to grow for 41 years, hosting speaker programs with experts joining us in person, online, from across the world. As a small nonprofit, we exist because of the generosity of individuals like you. So please consider donating by cash or check with the QR code on our table, in the hallway, or online. ICFRC would like to give a heartfelt thank you to today's sponsors and partners, including the UI Center for Asian and Pacific Studies, the UI Political Science Department, as well as the Iowa City Public Library for providing us the food today, the pizza that we're having today. And thank you for your support. Our next program will be Wednesday, 19 February at 5:30 p.m. at the UI Old Capitol Senate Chambers with speakers from a Global Thai Iowa delegation from Europe. And this program will focus on a range of perspectives about foreign policy issues. I'm sure you're all looking forward to this program. And of concern to Europe, to the United States in 2025. The panel of International Visitors Leadership Program participants and hosts, our own ambassador, Ron McMillan, will discuss, weighty issues like transatlantic relations, NATO, all the things that are going on right now with NATO, the United Nations, the United States, transborder environmental policy, and global trade trends, which frame positions in U.S. Foreign policy. I can guarantee you I will be there, so I hope you will join me. It will be great. So please see our website, icfrc.org, for the rest of this spring's program. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Jeffrey Ding, PhD, and Assistant Professor of Political Science at George Washington University. His book, Technology and the Rise of Great Powers, published with Princeton University Press, investigates how past technology revolutions influence the rise and fall of great powers, with implication for U.S.-China competition in emerging technologies like AI. Ding's research has been published in European Journals of International Relations, Foreign Affairs, International Studies Quarterly, Review of International Political Economy, and Security Studies. He received his doctorate in philosophy in 2021 from the University of Oxford, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar, and earned his Bachelor's of Arts in 2016 here at the University of Iowa. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ding for this afternoon's program.
Thanks so much, Dimi, for the generous introduction. Thanks, Peter, and Iowa City Foreign Relations Council for hosting me. I really wish I could be there in person. I grew up in Iowa City, went to school at University of Iowa, and so it's always great to be back, but it's tough to leave during the semester here while I'm teaching classes at GW. So I'm glad I'm able to join you all virtually. Let me make sure that we can see this. I think today I'll try to keep the talk pretty short, hopefully 30 minutes or less, so we have enough time at the end to take questions. I'm really interested in hearing what people think about the topic. Recently, you might have heard a bunch of headlines about the Chinese AI model DeepSeek and all this discussion about a US-China AI arms race. And so I chose this image to start off our discussion for two reasons. Number one, I think it's pretty representative that there's this geopolitical competition, this chessboard in which two great powers are engaging in competition over emerging technologies like AI. But I think this image is also useful for a second reason. I got really into chess again during the pandemic when the Netflix show The Queen's Gambit came out. And anybody who plays chess would be able to tell you that this position could never take place on the board, right? The kings should never touch each other. And I think so I think this picture illustrates that we have a pretty confused depiction or a pretty confused understanding of what US-China competition in AI would even look like, or what that even means. Maybe one starting point is this speech that Chinese leader Xi Jinping made to the BRICS summit. So this is a gathering of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, these emerging economies that are making up a larger proportion of global GDP and population. And he goes to the summit. The summit is structured on the theme of sustainable development in the fourth industrial revolution. And he goes there and gives a speech in which he calls back to past industrial revolutions, 3 past industrial revolutions that have fundamentally changed the development trajectory of human history. What happens in the Chinese system is leaders make speeches, and then months later, commentators and analysts try to decipher those speeches and interpret them. So here's a Chinese Communist Party publication, the 学习时报, Study Times. They go back and read through that speech and try to analyze it. And they add a really important point, which is that they make this connection between these past technological revolutions and which country seizes productivity leadership, right? So Britain becomes the #1 advanced economy in terms of productivity, and then the US seizes that mantle. So that's really important for the field that I am based in, which is international relations. One of the classic texts here is historian Paul Kennedy's book, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. And he outlines this regular pattern by which great powers rise and fall. And that process involves first differentials in technological change, these disruptive technological breakthroughs that occur in these technological revolutions. That leads to shifts in growth rates and shifts in the global economic balance of power. And then we see that gradually shape the geopolitical and military balance of power. So today, for the purposes of this talk and the scope of my book, I'm focusing on that first step in the chain. How do these technological revolutions affect which country is able to become the global economic power? And by that, I mean able to sustain productivity growth at higher rates than its rivals. The standard account here is what I call leading sector theory. It might sound pretty familiar to you because it's what is often covered in the news and in existing analysis. We focus on which country is able to monopolize key new advances in fast-growing industries. Then they can reinvest those monopoly profits, those exports that they make to other countries, selling their products in these industries, reinvest those into becoming the world's most productive economy. And so this quote by Dan Dresner, who's a professor at Tufts, summarizes what the scholarly literature thinks of when they try to answer the question, how do technological revolutions affect the rise and fall of great powers? It's about a great power monopolizing innovation, so pioneering new breakthroughs in these fast-growing industries. It's a pretty influential perspective here where I live and work in DC as well. It's building off of this work by development economist Walt Rostow, where he identified this classic sequence of these great leading sectors. These are oftentimes new industries that become the largest sector of an economy. So some of the past examples include the cotton textiles industry, which was sparked by that invention you see below, Hargreaves spinning jenny, steel, chemicals, and the automobile industry. And political scientists have largely taken that sequence for granted. In this book, my argument in short is that there's a different pathway by which technological change shapes which country rises to become the economic leader. And so I focus on general purpose technologies. These are fundamental innovations that can't just be captured by one sector, like an automobile. But these are, in contrast, these are foundational innovations that have the potential to spread throughout the entire economy and affect the way things are done in every single sector. So classic examples are electricity, the steam engine, and potentially artificial intelligence, which is the technology I'm most interested in studying. And so if we have a different technological pathway where it's more about which country can adopt innovations instead of coming up with the newest breakthroughs, that's going to shape the institutions and policies that matter the most. And my book focuses on GPT skill infrastructure, or the education and training systems that widen the base of engineering skills associated with these general purpose technologies. So I just showed that. I'm showing a shot of the page 37 from the book, where it summarizes the different approaches. The conventional wisdom thinks this is a sprint to determine which country can create the most amazing Silicon Valleys. In my book, I'm saying this is more of a marathon won by countries that can diffuse innovations from their Silicon Valleys to their Iowa cities or to small and medium-sized businesses across the entire economy. I did have to look up what is the plural of Iowa City. Even though I've lived there for 18 years, I've never thought of having the plural form of that proper noun. So I think that is correct, that you just add an S to the end of the city name. Okay, so I gave you the preview, basically the nuts and bolts of it. For the rest of my time here, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the argument. I'm going to present evidence from one of the historical case studies covered in the book, the Second Industrial Revolution. And then we'll circle back to that opening slide. What does this all mean for what you're hearing about in the news now about US-China competition in AI? The building block of this argument is that new technologies present certain demands, and countries have to make adaptations in their institutions and their policies to meet those demands. They have to find that missing puzzle piece that fills in those gaps that these new technologies demand. The problem is leading sector theory, the conventional wisdom, focuses just on the demands of technological change as they relate to that initial innovation phase, that eureka moment that makes the headlines of the Wall Street Journal or MIT Tech Review. And so then we focus on the institutional factors and the policies that are geared towards monopolizing profits in leading sectors, that are geared towards making sure your country controls and monopolizes innovation in these new industries. So think maybe very stringent intellectual property rights systems that incentivize innovation. Think investment in cutting edge R&D to come up with the latest and the best breakthroughs. But what's important is that when you think about general purpose technologies, they demand a different set of responses because they're different from leading sectors. Economists and economic historians deem them to be historical engines of growth. They often usher in waves of productivity growth. And so I won't go through all the details about what makes a GPT different from other technologies. I think the key here is if you think about maybe one quick example, if you think about two emerging technologies that are in the news today, electric vehicles and artificial intelligence. Electric vehicles is a leading sector. It's a very fast-growing industry. It's growing very quickly, founded off the back of new technical innovations. But electric vehicles, what's happening in electric vehicles is not redefining how every other sector in the economy operates. But what is happening, the advances in artificial intelligence as general purpose technology, it is completely transforming what every single automaker is doing in terms of shifting their cars, their electric vehicles to be more intelligent, right? So one technology is more enabling than the other. What's important about this GPTs is historically, they follow this regular pattern in which it's a very slow process of diffusion and spread and adoption into widespread use. And it requires all these complementary innovations in other sectors because they need to change their organizational practices. They need to upskill in talent to accommodate this new GPT. And so here it's not about which country comes out with a new GPT. Every country is every great power, all these leading economies are all developing frontier innovations in AI. Here, the real question is which country is able to adopt these technologies at scale. And of course, being a pioneer, having strong innovation capacity in AI is going to help that country. It might correlate with higher rates of adoption, but it's certainly not determinative, and that's affected by a bunch of other factors. And so there's this counterintuitive point that when we're talking about competition among advanced economies over general purpose technologies, it might be more about imitation and diffusion than innovation. Okay, second part of my argument. Now that we know how GPTs make their mark on the economy, what institutional adjustments do countries have to make? I focus on the institutions that train and educate talent, right? Like the University of Iowa. And so my focus here is on institutions that widen the pool of engineering talent linked to new GPTs. It's about average engineers, not about the best and the brightest experts. And so this GPT skill infrastructure is able to unlock two things that are oftentimes thorny for GPTs to spread. First is something that's common to all technologies. The technology races ahead and the skills have to try to catch up, right? So there's a certain amount of human capital upgrading that has to take place. I think the second factor is the most important. Unlike for other emerging technologies that are contained in a single sector, maybe in pharmaceuticals or in automobiles, for a GPT to make its mark, the GPT sector has to coordinate with all these other application sectors. Think about AI today. If you're in the education and tutoring industry and you're trying to come up with, you're trying to use AI to improve your industry, you need to know what is happening with large language models. You need to know, are there a series of benchmarks I can use to determine which one is more fit for purpose for my applications? At the same time, the construction industry is also trying to develop computer vision applications to improve productivity in that sector. But they also need to know what's happening in the AI sector. And there has to be a lot of coordination and information flows between sectors for a GPT to thrive. Engineering talent solves both of those problems because having this wide pool of engineering talent and skills means that you've standardized and you've standardized information about GPTs, and it lowers the barrier of entry for people to learn about what's happening in the GPT. And so that's why oftentimes after a GPT emerges, we see a completely new engineering discipline. So think electricity and electrical engineering. Computer science following in the wake of the computer, even though it doesn't have the name engineering in the title, it's very much an engineering-oriented discipline. Okay, in sum, we have the marathon competition over GPTs versus the sprint to leading sectors, two different mechanisms. The last four columns there sum up my argument about how they're different, right? So in terms of impact timeframe, GPTs take a really long time to be incubated and diffused throughout the entire economy. Not the case with leading sectors. For GPTs, we should expect the country that becomes the leader in technological revolutions to have an edge in diffusion, not necessarily a monopoly on innovation. And technological advances should be dispersed across all these different industries, not just contained in one industry. All of that suggests very different institutional adaptations. And so for the leading sector approach, it might be more about deepening the skill base, whereas for GPTs, it's more about widening the skill base in spreading these technologies. So keep that in mind as we go through this second industrial revolution case. We're going to go through each of those dimensions and see, okay, did what happened in this historical case line up more with what the leading sector argument would expect versus what the GPT diffusion, my theory, would expect. A few background notes on second industrial revolution. So here we have a technological revolution. All these new innovations come about. Some scholars deem it to be one of the densest periods of scientific advance. This is 1870 to 1914. Okay, so we have a technological revolution. And then by the end of that period, before 1914, before World War I, we have a shift in the global economic balance of power, the relative decline of the United Kingdom and the rise of Germany and the US. I just want to say, like, every time you hear the phrase AI is the new electricity, people are calling back to this period. So instead of just gesturing toward it, we should take this comparison seriously and try to see what we can learn from this historical case. One of the most important things to flag here is that the US, not Germany, becomes the clear economic leader, especially if we're looking at these productivity figures that are really important for deciding the rise and fall of great powers. Because remember, that's key to sustained economic growth in the long run. And so that blue line is the US. We see the US clearly overtaking the United Kingdom on that metric. Germany never surpasses the UK. Okay, now we go through each of those dimensions, and essentially we're trying to answer the question, how did the US take advantage of the second industrial revolution to become the leading economic power? Leading sector theory would expect very quick impact from these new industries emerging, and that's what's, they should almost make a near instantaneous impact on US economic strength. GPT diffusion theory would suggest actually it will take decades for these technologies to be adopted and embedded in a wide range of productive processes throughout the entire economy. And so for all these different technologies at the time, one of the most important leading sectors was the chemical industry. It was the most scientifically advanced industry, but it definitely cannot explain the US's rise. The US was very late to establish industrial research labs, and so it can't really account for what drove US productivity growth. Same thing with electricity, probably which scholars deem both a leading sector and a GPT. We see that electricity's impact on the US economy became significant only after 1914. So you get the electric dynamo in 1870, which is the first practical industrial generator for electricity, but you don't see electricity's impacts on US economic productivity until 4 decades later, at least 4 decades later. So it can't account for the US's rise in this period. We see a similar delayed impact for all of these other technologies as well. Actually, the crucial technological trajectory came from innovations in machine tools. So these are milling machines, turret lathes, incubated much earlier in the mid-19th century. They let you shape and cut metal and wood in more precise ways, and so you can have standardized parts for the first time. That's what that interchangeable manufacturing process refers to. When your bicycle breaks down, instead of remaking the entire bike, now the parts are standardized so the company can just replace the part that broke down. And so this became the central general purpose technology in this period. And the timing checks out. These machine tool innovations, this system of interchangeable parts manufacturing spread and proliferated throughout American industry at the time that the US was rising as an economic power. Okay, second dimension. Is it about innovation or diffusion? Well, actually, the US here is not monopolizing innovations in all of these leading sectors. I think this quote from the British Institute of Electrical Engineers is pretty revealing, right? There's not that much of a difference between the UK and the US in terms of inventive genius, but the difference is in the practical application to across the nation. Here's some more evidence about the intensity in which the US adopted this system of interchangeable parts manufacturing, used these machine tools to throughout all different industries. It's not like the U.S. had come up with advanced machine tools that Germany or the U.K. did not have access to. Actually, these countries are sending all these study teams to the United States to figure out what's happening here, what's the secret, and they all report back. It's about this eagerness of adoption throughout all of industry. Okay, is it about growth and technological advance concentrated in a few sectors or broad-based? Most of the evidence suggests in favor of broad-based, which aligns with the GPT perspective as well. Last piece of evidence here, what does that mean about the institutional adaptations, the education and training institutions? If GPT diffusion theory, if my argument holds, we should see that the US best adapted to the demands of interchangeable parts manufacturing by broadening its mechanical engineering skill base and having a broader pool of institutions that can train mechanical engineers. And that's the case. Britain certainly did not. Britain just did not produce enough. And Germany did produce enough, but they were not able to standardize and systematize this mechanical engineering education process. Let me give you one piece of evidence for this that you certainly cannot read, but I'll try to give the context behind this. This is a translated report published in the U.S. Bureau of Education's findings from 1895, where they translated a German engineering professor who compared mechanical engineering education at 3 schools representative of the German model. Those are the 3 rows at the top, compared to 2 U.S. institutions representative of the U.S. mechanical engineering model. Those are the 2 schools at the bottom. And the darker shaded lines represent the amount of time devoted to practical exercises in the lab and the shop, where that is just happening much more in the US. The type of mechanical engineering education is being systematized and standardized in a way that matches up with what industry wants and is more aligned with this diffusion approach. Whereas German universities were training their students in mechanical engineering instruction that was much more theoretical. I'll just say one thing about chemicals here, right? Because this is a sector where the US is very far from the innovative frontier. We're sending our best and brightest to Germany to go get PhDs in chemistry. And this quote on the right here from Rosenberg and Steinmuller is especially illuminating because it shows that even though the US is far from the frontier, they're building this discipline of chemical engineering, specifically through this unit operations model at MIT, in which it's not about which country can come up with the latest, greatest synthetic dyes from chemicals and get a lot of exports and sort of have really big firms. It's about which country can take the chemicalization process, titration, crystallization, these unit operations, and apply them across all these different industries that use chemicalization processes like petroleum, food preservation, all these different industries. And that's what the US had leadership in. Okay. Too much text here, but I just wanted to put up one slide summaries of the other 2 historical case studies that I cover. Notice that in that first quote from Chinese leader Xi Jinping, he mentioned those 3 industrial revolutions. Scholars have also identified these 3 industrial revolutions. And so I go through each of them, basically following that same process, right? We go through those different dimensions and see whether it supports the GPT or the leading sector account. It's interesting about the 3rd industrial revolution case. This is US-Japan competition in high-tech sectors. What's really interesting here is everyone thinks Japan is going to become the #1 economic power, but it doesn't. There's no economic power transition that occurs. And this is my favorite quote from the entire book. People who were trying to predict what was going to happen with Japan, they pointed to, look, Japan is dominating in all these leading sectors. And they made that exact comparison to what leading sector theory thought happened in the 2nd Industrial Revolution case, right? So, Germany's dominating in these really scientifically advanced industries that are monopolizing innovation. Japan's doing the same in all these consumer electronics industries. They should become #1. But they didn't. And the reason they didn't, as I argue in this chapter, is they did not outcompete the US in the diffusion of general purpose technologies. Specifically, the main GPT of the time was the computer. Okay, threw a lot of theory at you, threw a lot of history at you. Let's go back to what we started this presentation on. What does this mean for US-China competition in AI? And I'm just going to go through all those dimensions again. I think a lot of the existing scholarship and policymaking circles very much have adopted the leading sector model, and sort of they've taken the wrong lessons from these past industrial revolutions. Note how their time frame is China's going to surpass the US on AI within the decade. It's going to happen this decade. Some people say in the next 2-3 years. GPT diffusion theory suggests, hey, these things take decades to spread throughout the entire economy. If this new era of deep learning started in the early 2010s, we shouldn't see the substantial impacts on economic productivity before 2030. Okay, is it about innovation or diffusion? A lot of analysis about China's growing AI prowess, including all the hype about the DeepSeek model that was released last week, is geared towards who's coming up with the latest and the greatest breakthroughs, who's investing more in cutting-edge R&D, who has the top startups, who has the most valuable frontier firms. GPT diffusion theory suggests it's about which country is best positioned to diffuse AI at scale. And so in some of my other research, I've shown that actually China has been pretty slow to diffuse other information and communications technologies like cloud computing, industrial software, and other aspects of digitalization. That's another article I published on the topic if folks want to dig more into what I call China's diffusion deficit. Okay, is it about just a few key sectors, or is it about this horizontal economy-wide approach to technology policy? And I think both countries have focused on like a few strategic industries, whereas this is from a State Council think tank report that's actually criticizing China's approach and saying, hey, we should try to adopt more economy-wide innovation efforts and not focus on picking winners in a few technologies. Okay, lastly, what does this mean for how countries should adapt to what some people are calling the fourth industrial revolution? I think the US is in a pretty good position in terms of the number of institutions that can train average AI engineers. In the book, I did an exercise where I counted up the number of universities in each country that had just one researcher, one affiliated researcher that had published in an established AI conference. So it's a very low bar to say that this institution can train average AI engineers that can implement large language models across different applications, for example. The US had 159 of those universities. China only had 29. And so once you get past the Tsinghuas and the Peking universities and the Nanjing universities, Shanghai Jiaotong universities, China does not have as wide of a bench of institutions that can train quality AI engineers. Another thing that matters for diffusion that we've talked through in some of the historical examples is, are industry and academia, are there strong linkages between those two spheres? Are different parts of your science and technology ecosystem talking with each other and sharing ideas with each other? So one indicator I use for that is which country has more academic corporate hybrid publications in the AI domain. So that just means the paper has at least one author from industry and one author from academia. And US leads the world in this. China faces significant challenges on this metric. What does this mean for the US's approach to technology strategy? So this is a foreign affairs commentary I published based off of the book that summarized some of the lessons for policymakers. I think the US has very much adopted a Fortress America. Let's try to prevent cutting edge innovations in AI from leaking out of our borders. Instead, GPT diffusion theory suggests a run faster approach. Instead of doing that, try to improve and sustain the rate at which AI becomes embedded in a wide range of productive processes. And some of the specific details there include investing in community colleges as an alternative pathway to training AI engineering talent, There are these voucher systems that incentivize small and medium sized firms to bring in ideas and talent from frontier firms in AI. So different approaches that take more of a diffusion-centric lens. Okay, let me leave it there. Thanks for your attention. The book is available anywhere you get your books. I hope it's at Prairie Lights or sort of local bookstores too. Who knows? One of the reviewers said it wasn't necessarily an airport book. But I do hope this gave you a teaser in terms of what's in it. And yeah, if you're interested in a better understanding of how and when emerging technologies affect economic power transitions, or if you just need a little bit more faded orange colors in your life, please pick up a copy. Let me leave it there and looking forward to the discussion to follow.
Thank you. Trying to turn this on, Peter. Thank you very much, Jeff. It's so great. And I want to start with the first question, then I'll open it up to the public. I know they have a lot of questions for you. In the book, you talk about the countries that manage to adopt this technology a lot faster. They are the one that will have the edge that you talked about, okay? And it's one thing that government put policies in place to encourage the technology to kind of like publicize the technology. But what if people are still, reluctant to adopting the technology? What can we do, those of us in academia, that are trying to really help the fast adoptions?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. One of the factors that I didn't touch on as much is sort of public fears about new technologies, right? And so sometimes governments have tried to demonstrate the safety of these technologies. I don't know if I have this anecdote correct, but I believe President Teddy Roosevelt installed electricity in the White House as a way to sort of convince the public that this was a safe technology and sort of encourage greater electrification. So I think in the context of AI, there are also safety concerns. There's concerns about privacy, the trustworthiness of these models, and so prudent regulation actions by civil society groups to increase the transparency of these models, address some of these public concerns about safety and trustworthiness could also shape and influence the speed and the intensity at which AI is adopted throughout the entire economy.
Thank you, thank you. So we have a couple questions in the back. I'll take you first.
The fact that the Chinese model or AI that was just released is open source, does that have relevance?
It's a great question. Yeah, so just to set the context a little bit, in AI right now, there's two different tracks of developing these models. One is closed source. So if you're familiar with OpenAI's ChatGPT system, you use an interface to call an API, and then you get access to the model. In an open source development trajectory, they have made all the code, the model weights of these different AI systems publicly available. And so any developer can use those and try to build their own systems on top of them. I think generally, in my opinion, sort of a healthy open source AI ecosystem will facilitate greater diffusion. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty there, right? I think in some application sectors, I think the key variable here is how much do you need to fine tune and tweak the general model, the general foundation model of AI for your particular application. So you can imagine in some sectors, in some applications, you can just keep calling ChatGPT, right? And you can just incorporate an API system, and you just use the closed source, and that allows for adoption. But maybe in some industries, you want to fine-tune that foundation model a little bit more. So you might favor an open source solution where you might have a team of your own developers. You want to train it on like a specialized data set that only covers like the specific legal cases that your firm wants to use AI to help solve and analyze. And that's going to improve the model. And there, the open source trajectory might be more conducive for adoption. So there's still a lot of uncertainty about what is the distribution of application sectors in AI that would better use an API system versus building their own models on top of open source systems. But it's going to be a critical factor going forward. And another factor is there's different costs associated too, right? Open source models are usually smaller and require less, they're less costly to use, whereas you might pay more to use a closed source model like OpenAI's ChatGPT. And so a lot of things up in the air, but I think you've highlighted a really crucial variable about the health of an open source software ecosystem.
Yes, we'll take you.
Thank you for your talk, Dr. Ding. Very informative. There's a big demand that the AI technologies for electrical, and what I'm wondering is alternative electrical, such as nuclear, the various ones, solar, wind, and that kind of thing. Wouldn't it also start some new trends for innovation and dispersion among those different types of energy producers?
Yeah, great point. Correct me if I'm wrong. You are not talking about like the demand, AI's demand for energy, like to train these models. You're talking about the use of AI to come up with new innovations across different renewable energies or alternative energies.
Yes, he said correct.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, so it's not a space that I'm too familiar with. The stuff that I've seen some is like in these smart city solutions, people are using better AI models to predict energy demand and sort of make the grid more efficient. I could imagine that I'm just spitballing a little bit here, but just in electric vehicles, you're always trying to find what are the best materials to maybe create new generation batteries, and AI seems to be really good at helping sort through different potential candidates of new materials. And so there could be applications along that spectrum too. But yeah, I'm not too well versed on the AI applications in renewable energy and alternative energy industries, but I imagine it's a fascinating area to explore more.
Yeah, do you work from a specific definition of great power, or is it kind of an intuitive thing?
Yeah, so all of the cases involve countries that are in like the top 10 of what some people have called surplus domestic power. This is sort of like a study that international relations scholars use to try to measure power. I think the essence of how I define power is just countries that have large enough economies that are also very advanced in terms of their economies. And so one proxy for that people like to use in my field is GDP multiplied by GDP per capita. So it's not enough to just be a big country that's not very advanced. And it's not enough to be a really, really advanced country like Switzerland or Singapore, but not really big. But if you meet both of those, then the multiple of those two will be really large. And so just to give another example, actually in the first industrial revolution case, so think 1760 to 1840, China actually has the largest economy and largest population at that time, but they're not as advanced of an economy in terms of a productivity or economic development perspective. So they're not on the list of great powers. So I'm picking from all of the cases cover countries that were in the top 10 in that indicator at the time. And they're usually ones that are cited in the literature on the rise and fall of great powers. But it's an important point that there's still ongoing debates about what makes a great power. I adopt a pretty materialist lens in terms of like, it's mostly about what economic resources you have as a proxy for that. But others have made arguments that what makes a power great is more about their status in the international system. And so other historical studies of great powers have used indicators like how many diplomatic missions visited your country as a sign of that status in the international system.
Hey, Jeffrey, Karen Walksmith here. Really happy to hear your lecture today. I was hearing you talk about the relationship between industry and universities and how people in universities become leaders in the field, how they train others. And so I know that you spent time in China at a university, and now you've also spent time in the UK at a university. And China has been pretty closed in past years for us to know what's going on in the universities and for visitors. So can you say a little bit about that relationship?
Yeah, really great question, Karen. Good to see you again. Karen worked with me on a lot of my scholarship applications, and so really grateful for all your support. And I got to study at Peking University, one of China's top universities, through a program supported by the Boren Scholarship. And yeah, I imagine it's a pretty hectic week in international education, so I appreciate you taking the time to be here. So I would say, from my perspective, I've spent most of my time at Peking University, which is, I think, in that category of institutions that is training elite AI scientists, right? So that the DeepSeek team of like 150 researchers, the Chinese model that came out last week that everyone's talking about, a large proportion, overwhelming proportion of their team is coming from Tsinghua, Peking University, sort of the top two universities, both based in Beijing. So I think from my experience there, yeah, I think China certainly has these really top research universities that are competitive in terms of innovation and leading edge innovations. I think the gap that my book is trying to highlight is actually institutions that I haven't spent a lot of time with, so I'm mostly speaking from someone using secondary sources. And it's sort of, once you get below the first tier of elite universities, now can you develop these institutions that can train sort of quality AI engineers? And I think that's where the U.S. has an advantage in sort of like our regional universities, like the University of Wisconsin system is training a lot of AI engineers and software engineers, the University of Texas system. And so I think once you get below that first tier of like who's producing the people that are developing new models at OpenAI or Anthropic or ByteDance, it's more about who can develop these institutions that can train a broad base of AI engineers, and then also are these institutions connected to other parts of the science and technology ecosystem? Like, are they all talking to each other in this organic and oftentimes like market-driven process, a decentralized process? So I think the point I'll land on here is that the more that China tries to take a more centralized approach to managing its universities, which I think is happening more and more, even at the elite institutions like Peking and Tsinghua that are usually protected, the less conducive that is to spreading general purpose technologies like AI.
We'll take one question in the front and then two in the back.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today. I had a question about the environmental impact of AI and how the scarcity of resources is going to affect the future of AI and the future of environmental resources in general. Because AI uses a lot of environmental and economic resources to create it, do you think that countries will be focusing on securing those resources as they become more and more scarce in our world and economy?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So we've seen this demand for building more and more data centers with clusters of chips optimized for training larger and larger AI models, right? To your question, and now we're seeing U.S. tech companies sign deals with nuclear companies and small modular reactors, sort of already exploring ways to use more energy to train models. So I think that's where the environmental costs are. I think it's important to make this distinction because I think I've seen some people say like the environmental cost of querying a large language model or an AI model. I think that I'm not as concerned about that cost because you can't just assess that in a vacuum. You have to compare it to what is the comparison to doing like a Google search versus querying a large language model. And I think a lot of estimates have shown there's not that much difference there. So I think the concern here is if the scaling laws hold, which just means we need to throw more and more computing power at the problem to get better and better and more intelligent AI systems, then yeah, I think it seems like one of the only constraints is just the amount of energy that we have online on the grid to train these models, and so that's why you're seeing these companies sign deals with companies in nuclear energy, and so yeah. But I think what I'll say there too is, one thing that's interesting about DeepSeek and some of the models that Chinese companies are building is they're not necessarily going along that scaling law track. And there might be a way to train models that have good enough performance without needing to keep building bigger and bigger models and throwing more and more computing power at the problem. So I think that's going to be the crux of the issue there.
Very good. So we'll take the last two questions, and I think you have, and then we'll take you.
Tech in the U.S. kind of has a bad reputation right now between certain members of our current political administration, kind of turning it into a bit of a social laughingstock. And in the last couple of years, at least a lot of people in my peer demographic have been, dismantling this like myth around blockchains, NFTs as like an economic progress model, because the cost is sort of astronomical compared to the product, the result of its use. So I'm wondering if you think in any way, shape, or form if AI is kind of just a bubble waiting to burst, even though it is really widely adopted at this moment, or they're trying to go for wide diffusion, or if this is the Industrial Revolution where like cultural backlash finally outweighs it, especially also with like climate concerns that are really, really damning right now.
Yeah, I think it's important to, and this is a really important question because I didn't have time to give the caveat, which is I am not a technological prognosticator. I think it's very difficult to make predictions about these technologies. If I were giving this talk 2 years ago, we would be talking more about another subdomain of AI, which is computer vision or facial recognition. If I were giving this talk 20 years ago, we would be talking about nanotechnology, because that's what the Clinton administration went all in on. And if you go back for the book, I went back and found all these quotes of like Clinton administration people saying, this is technology that will cure the blind and let the lame walk. And now no one is talking about nanotechnology. So it could very well be the case that this is a bubble. I think for me, the most important thing is can we come up with some indicators that would show AI is a good candidate to be a general purpose technology? And so one indicator of that is looking at patent data. And so you mentioned blockchain, right, or NFTs. So some people have compared, okay, let's look at a sample of blockchain patents and then a sample of machine learning patents. So patents in sort of like the cutting edge AI category. Let's look at all the different patents that cite those blockchain patents and all the different patents that cite those machine learning patents. What's interesting about AI and why it has the better case to be a general purpose technology is the patents that cited the machine learning patents came from a much greater diversity of technology classes. You can code different patents based off of what technology class they're in, what industry they're in, compared to the patents that cited the blockchain patents. And so that's showing you that there might be a more generality of usefulness from one technology sector than the other. So I can feel pretty confident in saying that AI has a really good case to be that next general purpose technology. And historically, we've seen that GPTs do eventually land with a pretty big impact. But again, with the caveat that I'm not necessarily in the business of making predictions.
Very good. Last question.
This one will probably be kind of quick, but listening to your talk, it just seems to me, sort of from a bird's eye view, that the idea of diffusion, by the way at least that you were discussing it in your talk and perhaps in the book as well, isn't really compatible with the type of government that China has. Like, China's not looking to do that necessarily. So it almost seems a little bit like apples and oranges to a certain extent, right? Comparing that specific aspect between United States and China, because that's not really what they want. And I think you just, to my mind anyway, you kind of confirmed it with your comment about the universities in China, two of the leading universities in the world, but yet their intellectual freedom, if I could say it that way, has been or is being sort of restricted. And that would, well, present perhaps government aside, but that hopefully would never happen in the United States by definition. And that's why some of the leading institutions in the world are here in this country for that very reason. So did I understand that correctly? Would that be a correct sort of question, I suppose?
Yeah, so I would start by being very clear on this point. I think the Chinese government wants AI to diffuse across the entire country. I think if you want economic productivity growth, which most countries want, China especially wants economic productivity growth because their regime, the legitimacy of their regime comes not from elections or universal suffrage or a democratic system, but the legitimacy of their regime comes from performance. Can I sustain economic growth? Do you see what's happening? Do you see your life getting better, your economic livelihood getting better? And so the Chinese government very much wants the diffusion of AI across the entire economy. But to your point, the regime type or the level of centralization, all these different things are going to make it harder for their system to have these fast-acting organic diffusion processes. And so I've done other research on the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was able to marshal resources in a top-down coordinated way to come up with really great innovations like Sputnik. They were less able to encourage those innovations to diffuse throughout the entire economy. It's hard for a planned economy to do that. And so I think the more that China moves back towards that planned economy model, the less successful they'll be at diffusing AI across the entire economy.
Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey, for these excellent discussions. Let's give it up for Jeffrey, please. And thank you to you, the audience, for coming and the great questions that you ask. And we hope to see you all on Wednesday, 19 February at 5:30 p.m. in the Old Capitol Senate chambers for our next program, U.S. and European Foreign Policy, Global Challenges, with Ambassador Macmillan as the host and the IVLP delegation from Europe. Thank you all for attending today's program, and have a great end of your day.